So we'll start with our opening prayers, taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. And we'll go ahead and do this in the Tibetan. Sangye chedam la jamchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi dagi jinso gibe sonamki drola penchir sangye druparso sangye chedam soki chognamla Jamchu bardu dagni hyapsuchi dagi jinso gipe sonamki drola penchir sangye druparsho sangye chodang soti choknamla jamchu bardu dagni hyapsuchi Dagi jinso gipe sonamki drola penchir sangye druparsho. Four measurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then we will go to the seven-limb prayer. And as some of you may know, this is a sort of a short outline in prayer form of a much more thorough practice, or a puja, a seven-limb puja. And this is basically the outline of it. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And then we make, finally we make this part of the prayers, we make the Mandala Offering. And here we just imagine what existence would be like if all beings were completely free from suffering, were completely free from ignorance, had a complete understanding of interdependence and interconnection. What kind of existence, what kind of world would that be? And imagine that, and make this an offering to the spiritual teachers, the Buddhas, and all the Bodhisattvas in the space in front of you. Sajipaki Jukshin Meto Tramri Rabling Ji Nidegen Parti Sangye Jingdu Migderulwagi Dropunam Dakshingla Chepashtu Idam Guru Vadamandalakam Niryatayami. And then we go to the essence of causation mantra, this ancient Sanskrit mantra, which talks about how the Buddha taught how everything arises from a cause, how suffering arises from a cause, happiness arises from a cause, and the Buddha taught what those causes are. And he also taught the path, liberate ourselves from suffering, and the path to achieve complete happiness for the benefit of all beings. So here's this prayer in Sanskrit. Yedamra hetu. Om Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava Hetu Tesham Tatagato Hyavadat Tesham Cha Yo Niroda Evam Vahi Mahashramamana Swaha. And then stanza 5 from the 18th chapter of Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, the treatise on emptiness. And this is it. By extinguishing actions and afflictions, there is liberation. Now, afflictions are disturbing states of mind. So by distinguishing actions, basically the actions that cause disturbing states of mind, there is liberation. Actions and afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. And when they're talking about elaborations, he's saying that when there's some object of our awareness, say there's a person, a relationship we have, somebody they do something that we don't like, or that we don't approve of, or that it bothers us in some way, we elaborate on that. We elaborate the negative qualities of that person. Just think of anybody who you just absolutely can't stand. You know, I always mention, take your favorite politician that you love to hate, and it's quite easy to do this. So what we do is we elaborate all of these negative qualities onto that person that may not exist at all, because we do not actually know. We're not omniscient. We don't know the full truth of what's going on. So these elaborations are what causes our own mind to become disturbed. Our own mind becomes disturbed because of that. And because of that disturbance, we begin to generate a negative propensity on our mind stream, and we begin to generate negative karma. So it's in our best interest to not elaborate good qualities or bad qualities. If there's something that we're extremely attached to, we are so grasping onto this thing, say it's a person, and we can't let them go. Well, what we're doing is we're elaborating all these good qualities about this person, making them much more delicious than they actually are, and that we must have them, and we can't possibly live without them. That creates this terrible clinging to this person, and we're not able to let go when perhaps the time comes when we should let go, that it's okay to let go. But because we don't, it creates this disturbance again in our mind, disturbance on our mind stream, and then it creates these afflictive emotions, this clinging and grasping that just we carry with us. So part of what we're learning here with the view of emptiness is how to let go of this kind of very strong attachment and strong aversion, and to see what's really behind all of that. So we're going into a very interesting chapter, part of the ninth chapter. It's I'm splitting it up into my own little sections, and I'm calling this the seventh section, part 7. And what we're talking about here specifically is the selflessness of persons. We talked last time to some degree about the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena, and there are two aspects of emptiness that Shantideva talks about, and that these two aspects of emptiness we have to be able to realize. We have to understand and realize them if we actually want to be liberated from the suffering of cyclic existence, and if we actually want to become enlightened, if we want the omniscience of Buddhahood. We need to be able to have a understanding and a realization first of the selflessness of persons, and then of the selflessness of phenomena. They say that the selflessness of persons is easier for us to understand and to realize, and we shall see. His Holiness in the commentary by His Holiness the Dalai Lama on this chapter, he does not call it selflessness of persons or selflessness of phenomena. He calls it personal identitylessness and phenomenal identitylessness. So that just gives you another idea, another way that can be translated. Sometimes we have we might have trouble thinking that a phenomena has a self, like this, this coaster. There's a self of this coaster. Well, all it's talking about is the identity or the, we even talk about the coaster almost like it has a self. We'll say the coaster's shape, the coaster's color, the coaster's design. It's like as if the coaster somehow is the owner of it and is the self of it. So that's what's meant by the selflessness of phenomena. But in actuality, we discussed last week, a personal self, the I, is just an aspect of all phenomena. I mean, the I, a personal self, is a type of phenomenon. And that is just an aspect of the overarching phenomena that is selfless. But they separate it into these two. Okay. Up to this point in the text, Shantideva has talked about emptiness in the context of the Prasangika Madhyamika school, which is the highest school of Buddhist tenets. So he's talking about emptiness from that point of view. And at that point of view is in Buddhism, it's by far the most profound and far-reaching expression or view of what emptiness is. When we're talking about the Chittamatra, which is the second highest school, the Chittamatra school discusses the selflessness of phenomena. They talk about the selflessness of phenomena, but what they're saying is, when they're talking about that, what they're saying is no external objects exist. In other words, the phenomena that's out there doesn't exist. It's selfless. It doesn't exist out there. That the phenomena that's out there is merely an appearance of the mind. But what the Chittamatras say is that there's a mind basis of all that actually does exist, that truly exists, that inherently exists. And so this is where the Prasangika finds fault with the Chittamatra. Not so much in saying that the way objects appear out there to us is not necessarily the way they are in if you wanted to say in some kind of objective reality. And as we discussed before, if you're talking about neuroscience, we're talking about waveforms and particles and things like that, and there is no reality, subjective or objective reality, I should say, until those waveforms and particles, just like a radio station or Wi-Fi would, decodes those into a particular thing, so they're frequencies, and our human body, of course, decodes them in a particular way. And there's all kinds of frequencies and waveforms out there. So the Prasangika viewpoint would not really disagree with the Chittamatra viewpoint that phenomena that are out there don't exist the way they appear to us. Prasangika would say, yeah, they appear differently depending on who's decoding them, what kind of being, what kind of apparatus is decoding them. So where the difference lies is that Prasangika says there is no inherently existing self, and Chittamatra says, no, the mind, the consciousness, there is a mind and consciousness that does exist. So we're going to get into this view now. We're going to talk about intellectual delusion and innate delusion. And we're talking about us here, our own intellectual delusions and our own innate delusions. So there are two ways that we can be deluded, intellectually and innately. Intellectually formed delusions are present in the minds of those of us who have been influenced by other views other than those that are instinctively our own. So for instance, we could hear the Chittamatra view that the mind exists inherently, and we could say, oh, I agree with that, I buy that, I feel like the mind exists inherently too. And that would be an intellectually it would be an intellectual delusion, because according to Prasangika, according to actually that logic, when you look at the logic of the Prasangika Madhyamika school and you look very carefully, you will see that they are correct, that the mind, the consciousness, does not exist independently, does not exist inherently. It is impermanent. It is affected by causes and conditions. and so therefore it is not independently existent. But we tend to believe it. Another way that we all would recognize is we'll hear some sort of authoritative source, such as I don't know what, science or religion.
George Bush, when he said in 2008 the fundamentals of the economy are sound.
Right. We hear an authoritative source like George Bush,
like politicians,
when he said the fundamentals of the economy are sound in, I think it was September of 2008.
Like a week before everything collapsed.
Yeah, and then a week later everything collapsed. They weren't sound, and he knew they weren't sound. But some people were buying that because the authority told them that. This is quite common among humans. You can see there are all kinds of beliefs that people will take on without actually analyzing them thoroughly to see if it's really so. Choose your own examples, because they are definitely out there. We do this all the time. So among the beings of this world, the intellectually formed delusions are generally present in the minds of humans, in human beings. Human beings are the ones who can sort of hear these kinds of things, make decisions about these things, whether science is correct about something, or the medical industry is correct about something, or politicians or governments correct about something, or religion is correct about something. This is something humans do. Animals don't do this. Other sentient beings in our world, they don't have those kinds of highly developed intellectual delusions. It's more like they just have an innate delusion. So as far as innate delusions are concerned, all of us, humans or otherwise, have a natural, instinctive tendency to view ourselves and the objects in the world around us as if they existed independently, as if they existed the way they appear to us, independently, separately, from their own side, existing. And that's the way it appears to us. We don't need any kind of indoctrination into this view. It is just innate. We don't even question it we don't question it until something like Buddhism comes up to say, or some kind of science says, there's another way that these things could exist, and then we start looking at it. But innately, we think everything exists the way it appears to us, just discrete, separate from one another, from their own side, existing independently. Animals, humans, they have this innate view. But the thing is, what we have to question is, what if things actually don't exist this way? What if they don't exist this way? What does that mean for our own happiness and the happiness of others if, in particular, the self, the I, the me, the ego that we so cling to with such tenacity doesn't actually exist the way we think it does? What would that mean? So that's what this chapter, or this section of the chapter, is going into. Shantideva is talking about how the self does exist, how things do exist. And it's kind of heady stuff. So now we're going to look at how the self appears to us. All of the suffering and all of the fearfulness of cyclic existence arise from the innate delusion of ego self-grasping. The Buddha has said that the ignorance that causes ego self-grasping is what causes cyclic existence, and causes the suffering of cyclic existence, causes the fearfulness of cyclic existence. It's ego self-grasping. So ego self-grasping is the me, it's the I, it's the self. And so we need to, if it is the cause of all of the suffering that we have, then we need to look at what actually is that? So we have this hardwired or seemingly hardwired idea that the self exists as an inherent, independently existing entity, alone and needy. Because it's alone, because it's separate, because we're alone, because we're separate from other things, we feel a lack. We feel that we need more. We need something. We need stuff. We need relationships. We need happiness. You know, we need all kinds of things. So this is how this feeling of neediness arises, because we think we exist independently, inherently, separately, alone. And it's the reason why we develop grasping attachment toward some kinds of entities, and then this kind of repulsive or fearful aversion towards other kinds of entities. Because some entities will see that thing is going to give me what I want. And then there will be something else that will get in the way of what you want, and you will go, that's not what I want. I don't like that. Or worse, that thing is actually attacking you and your happiness, and you are afraid of that thing. So this is how our grasping for something, our attachment, and our aversion arise because of this ego self-grasping. So, because of this, all of our afflictive emotions arise from this, and because of all those afflictive emotions, all of our negative karma arises because of this. And because of afflictive emotions and negative karma, there is cyclic existence. There is cyclic existence. If you look at the 12 steps, 12 links of dependent arising, you'll see that that's the problem. You know, we have this craving, we have this attachment, and then this just drives us continually, and we generate mind streams that are filled with mistaken habitual propensities of the way we think things exist, of the kinds of habits that we develop because of our afflictive emotions. Now, we can also have good propensities too. We can have beneficial ones. Absolutely, we can generate positive karma. But when we're talking about cyclic existence, the nature of it is suffering. The nature of it is suffering, disappointment, and then you just keep going over and over and over again, repeating the same thing. So what we're trying to do is to understand how do we stop that cycle? First for ourselves, and then how do we help others who we are interconnected with, interdependently connected with? How do we help others stop that cycle for themselves? So what we have to do in order to discover the selflessness of a person is that we have to recognize the identity or self that's in question here. We have to recognize what that identity or self is. If the self's appearance isn't clear in our own mind, then we won't be able to realize the non-existence of that self. So what Shantideva is now doing is trying to clarify for us what this self is that we're saying doesn't exist. What is this ego, self-grasping, and what is and basically the self of all phenomena as well. But we're starting with the ego. So this is from His Holiness in his commentary. He says, when we dream, all kinds of things may come to our mind, but we recognize these as being nothing more than appearances. And we know this. We can have a good dream or a bad dream, or just a weird dream, you know, and when you wake up, you go, oh, well, that was just a dream. It wasn't real, you know, it didn't inherently exist. It was just an appearance to my mind. His Holiness says, similarly, magician's tricks, or I would say the wizardry of special effects, because we're really familiar with that, create different kinds of illusory appearances, but we understand that they don't exist objectively. You know, we understand that, I gave this example weeks back, a hologram. When we see a hologram, and it may be a very convincing hologram, but if we know that it's a hologram, we understand that it doesn't actually exist inherently. It's not going to harm us. We don't have to be affected by it. We might be entertained by it, thrilled by it, get a little scared by it, but it would be just a thrill scare, not an actual real fear. So what he says is, likewise, all entities, ourself, others, cyclic existence, and liberation exist merely by the power of our minds and conventional agreement. In no way do these things exist by the power of the objects that we label and designate, such as person or house or ocean or planet, or let's say mala, right? So no way does this mala, is this mala thinking to itself, I'm a mala? There's no way. There's no way that the only way that this exists as a mala is because some of us sentient beings have agreed the function of this particular thing, what the function is, and we've given it a label. We've designated it as a mala. Now, somebody else may see this and they'll go, oh, yeah, those are prayer beads. It's the same thing, right? So we conventionally means there's an agreement. We agree among ourselves that this is what this thing is, So in that way, it's only existing in dependence upon our subjective conception of what it is and our conventional agreement among one another that this is what it is. Now, some people might go, oh, no, this is a necklace. And those of us who want, no, it's a mala. We would then be in disagreement about it, and we would say, no, you're mistaken that it's a necklace. This is a mala. Now, say an alien life form from a completely different galaxy and a completely different form and expression of consciousness were to land here and look at what we're saying is this thing that's a mala. Number one, their particular their particular vehicle for perception might not be at all like ours, completely different than ours. So that space alien would not even see this. That space alien would not have any concept of what we are saying this is functioning as and what it's for.
Was that your phone?
That was my phone. Thank you for first choice towing and auto repair is still on schedule. So that's for them, yeah. That's for our Airbnb guests. And say a group of these space aliens show up and they say are in this room, looking around this room. Well, you don't think they're actually going to see a coaster or a lamp or a bookcase, and that's what they're going to call it. They're not going to call it that because they're not even going to see it that way. They will see the way they decode whatever's here will be particular to them, and it will be particular to the way they perceive how things could function. So it's going to be completely different. Is this making sense at all?
Sure. Could it also be like, let's say a puppy sees that and says, ooh, chew toy,
Exactly. Much more, just keep it on our planet. Like Teresa said, a puppy sees this and goes, chew toy. Brian and Tracy know this well right now.
Yes, we do.
Everything's a chew toy, including, the furniture. So it depends. So the existence of this thing and everything else depends. It is a dependent arising, and it depends on the subjective consciousness that's apprehending it, and the conventional agreement among similar subjective consciousnesses that say, this is what this is for, this is how this functions. And that's, so it actually doesn't exist inherently. And even if you go to the actual what it's made of, physically what it's made of, again, it's utterly dependent arising. These particular beads are made out of wood. Of course, that came from some kind of tree. Ad infinitum, how the trees, are developed, how they're connected to the water, the cycles, the atmosphere. Then you get to the planet, you get to the cosmos, and there is no end to how things physically, just physically, materially, are interconnected and interdependent. Same goes for the thread, cotton. I think it's cotton thread that connects these beads. Same thing. It's completely and utterly a dependent arising. It does not exist inherently. It just appears to us that it exists that way. Is that making sense? Are there any questions about this?
So, Christopher, I don't know if you guys have this book. It's by Robin Wright, Why Buddhism is True.
No, I don't have that one.
I've been reading it, but there's an actually interesting discussion in this book about this topic. And at least according to this guy, it's not so clear that that Buddha clearly articulated the existence of a non-self, especially in terms of the five aggregates. And one of the things that's always puzzled me has been, if you think about our subtle consciousness, which we say goes from lifetime to lifetime. And even though you said that, and I don't remember if it was Shantideva who said this or someone else, that it's like a candle where the flame goes out and you light the next candle and the flame comes up, that somehow there is some I'll call it history, for lack of a better word, propensities or whatever, that moves from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, based upon all of your previous actions and all of your previous karma, etc. So if that's the case, even though it's changing, it still is somewhat of a constant because it does exist and it continues to evolve. So it's not identical. So if the definition of emptiness or the definition of non-self is that there's nothing that exists and doesn't change and it's always the same, then maybe that's the correct way to interpret it. But on the other hand, there may be some things that have some sense of permanence that we identify as part of self that may not be, quote, completely absent of some sort of continual existence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what you're talking about is a continuum. And
I think but more as perpetual rather than permanent.
yeah, and yeah, it would be, we wouldn't say, for instance, that just to use the analogy of a river, a continuum of a river, we wouldn't characterize the river as being permanent, because we know that rivers change, the courses of the rivers change, and it's constantly moving, constantly flowing. So in that sense, the what we would call or label the mental continuum of an individual, you might put it that way, is a dependent arising, and it's from moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, depending on the propensity of that continuum, the habitual formation, or I would say the habitual mental formations of that continuum. It will flow or go in a certain way, but it does continue to change, and things can happen to that continuum that can make it change drastically, like a river taking a fork in a completely different direction. So, in other words, if we were to look back over our countless previous lifetimes and see some part of the continuum that we're calling, our particular individual continuum, It could be a kind of being that we wouldn't even recognize as being anything like us at all, because there's been such a dependently arising, ongoing, perpetual movement and change and evolution, you might say, of that continuum, of that mental continuum. So it's not as if it's the same, it's not as if it's the same entity. Because we are different. We're different people than we were when we were children. We're different people. We know that. We've changed in huge ways. And so this is just one lifetime. When you start thinking of this continuum, like when you said, when I think it was Shantideva who talked about it being like when you pass from one life to the other, it's as if it's similar, or an analogy he's given is that you have there's one candle that's not lit, and there's a candle that's going out. That's your current life. And so you take the candle that's going out and you light it, you light the next candle with it, and then it continues. But it's not the same flame. It's not the same flame. It's a continuation of the flame, but it's not the same flame. And a flame is actually an example, because the flame is never the same.
Right. I get the ever-changing aspect of this, so I don't disagree, and I get that if you say something is not permanent or is non-changing, that is not reality. I agree with that.
Do you get the dependently arising aspect?
Sure. I mean, but at the same time, it seems to me that one of the aspects of the philosophy here is that, there's a path. The path that Buddha has kind of said, I have discovered, and these set of practices, these sets of thoughts, trainings, whatever you want to call it, you do with the goal of moving along this path to reach, enlightenment for the benefit of other sentient beings. So as you move through that path through multiple lifetimes, there still has to be some passage of past experiences, past karma, whatever you want to call it, from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. Now, yes, that can change, good or bad, or whatever our propensities are, depending upon our decisions and our behaviors. But the concept itself that you have this subtle consciousness, or you have this karma that comes with you along this path, and your actions can influence the path, still to me dictates that there is something that remains a path that is continuous, maybe changing, but still continuous as you evolve through this process.
I wonder. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Tony. I'm on the internet. I wonder if the commentators on the Buddha's ideas were less pragmatic than he was and more philosophical than he was. And what I mean is, we keep, all of us, of course, in life, keep searching for a thing, substance, an existent. And even if we think of it as a process, even if we think of it as a continuum, we're thinking in nouns, and we have this tendency to make something out of nothing. And I wonder if it's because of the way that we are searching. I think the Buddha, I didn't know him, of course, but I suspect that his teachings on this were pragmatic, and they were really designed not to set people on a quest for what does or does not exist, but instead to change the mental relation to the world without thinking about this or something. So I mean, I'm not trying to derail the conversation or make a criticism, but I know that the more that I think about these things, the more I tend to reify any kind of process that I think about. That's all.
Well, I think that, when I was talking about our innate delusion, that we're kind of hardwired to reify things.
Right.
That's the way, that's what we do. We think everything exists in a reified manner. We don't see it as interconnected and flowing, and we don't see the energetic connections and everything that's going on. And so I would agree with you, Tony. We are hardwired to reify things, and I don't agree that the Buddha was not teaching this kind of information, because if you look at the Mahayana teachings, and what we discussed last time was that His Holiness was saying that the Buddha only gave these Mahayana teachings to those disciples of his who had very, very pure karma, who it would actually be of benefit to them. It wouldn't be just confusing and strange for them. He gave different kinds of teachings to different kinds of people, depending on where he could see their capacity was. And so if it was somebody who could not take on board something like the concept of emptiness, he wouldn't talk about emptiness. He would just talk about, if you do this, if you behave in this way, things are going to get better, you'll be happier, you'll reduce your suffering. For those who had a much purer kind of karma, so there wasn't so much confusing or negative or disturbing karma on their mental continuum, because they've been working on themselves, then he would teach these higher levels, and even go into things like the very high tantric levels, which are basically describing or preparing or training yourself to have a completely different kind of existence than the one that the human type of existence that we have now, that we're so attached to. It's a completely different existence, an energetic existence that can take many, many different forms depending on what would be of most benefit to others. And that just sounds like La La Land to most of us. It sounds like, no, that's not possible. But I think those teachings are there, and they're there to take us all the way. Now, going back to your comment, Brian, about the seeming like there is a definite path that we're on. Yes, there's a continuum, and that continuum never ends. It's not going to come. The continuum is not going to come to an end. When a Buddha becomes enlightened, the continuum is still there. It's without that continuum, without that conscious continuum, how could a Buddha possibly? It would be lights out for the Buddha, completely gone. It would come to an end. That's not the case. There is never an end to this continuum. It's just what matters is, how are we shaping that continuum with our mind, with our behaviors, body, speech, and mind, our actions. How are we shaping that continuum? Because it's not as if the karma from the past is existing in the past. Whatever is the very, very strong habits that we have, be they good, be they negative, beneficial, or destructive, if they're very strong habits, we continually keep them moving in our continuum. We carry them with us the same way a stream would carry a leaf or something that is stuck, with the stream, until we change our habitual patterns in some direction. Those karmic propensities or habits or proclivities are going to keep generating within, moment to moment to moment within our continuum.
Right.
It's not as if we're dragging them along with us. We are generating them along with us.
Right. You indicated, it's the power of the mind,
Mm-hmm.
not the power of the object.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And our mind is created by habits, how we think about things. It's also, you mentioned about authoritative figures. They could just be teachers, our parents, that give us beliefs about ourselves, about the world in which we live, that are negative and positive. And you can believe those beliefs. Most people don't realize some of the beliefs you have, they're not even yours. They were given to you by authoritative people in your life when you were a child. Oh, you're brilliant. Oh, you're stupid. Oh, you're, beautiful. Oh, you're ugly. Oh, you're
gossip share.
Exactly. And a belief is a pretty tricky thing to shift, because the subconscious keeps them in place because it thinks it keeps you alive. Like if you have certain beliefs, like that's poisonous, that's dangerous, don't do it, then it's very tricky to do it. But if you just tell yourself a slightly different story of a potential negative belief, something like I'm not capable or I'm not whatever, you know, if you slightly tell yourself a slightly different story, but a better one, something that you could pass by your subconscious that it will allow through. Because if you go, oh, I'm the smartest person in the world, and you think you're not, your subconscious won't let you shift that belief. You have to do it incrementally, like you're saying, little bit by little. You know, a river doesn't change its course quickly. It's a gradual process, you know, where it ebbs and flows and changes the banks of it. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And so it's knowing that it's the power of our mind, and knowing how we can shift the power of our mind subtly at small increments at a time. You know, that's my thought on the whole thing.
Elaborating on
Just turn it towards you like that, and then
what Tracy said. I mean, I was so happy to hear you use the term power of the mind. And, you know, Tony's comments, also, I got very excited and happy. And Brian's question, I got very excited and happy in the sense that I've been reading this one volume on the topic that we had never touched with the monks, which is the explanation from a Buddhist point of view of the creation of the cosmos and of the beings within the cosmos. And you know, Tracy's comments point to, and actually, I mean, all the questions of the comments are all pointing to this, but the power of the consciousness. So the power of the consciousness is just fucking amazing, because everything that you experience, all of the knowledge in the universe that you are aware of, all of that is an interplay between your consciousness and everything that you think is internal and external knowledge or objects of knowledge. I think it's relevant to this conversation about selflessness. And I got this volume because I was curious about their explanation of the cosmos. So in short, some of you may know this already, but for those of you who don't, I'll just kind of simplify what the discussion is that there's two kind of views about what sort of particles and energy primordially exists. Now, overall, the Buddhist explanation of the creation of the cosmos is that, like everything else, there's the creation, the duration, the dissolution, you want to call it destruction, and then from the destructiveness, the chaotic, unformed thing then begins to organize, and this cycles over and over again infinitely throughout time, and we see this at every level of existent things. So the cosmos, they say in these writings, this is from the Abhidharma, that through the shared karma of like-minded sentient beings, a universe system comes into being. And they describe it in the Abhidharma, you know, it's almost like the Bible, you know, how it evolves. And it's a very detailed description of how sentient beings evolved from purely just being consciousness with this shared karmic experience to as the thing unfolds, what you would call more material or grosser material, it becomes less subtle, less like light beings and more like material beings. And this process is slow and evolutionary, and you know, we go from this is according to the Abhidharma writings. So, and also the Kala Chakra Tantra describes pretty much the same thing. So I found it rather eye-opening, and it definitely addresses this discussion, because what they're saying is the whole milieu that you think you exist within, the whole paradigm, every book you've written, every academic institution, every scientific discipline, all of the stuff that evolves in our world as we know it in our collective experience now is merely through the power of our minds having generated these appearances. And it's almost, Tony kind of touched on this indirectly, but it's not, it's like we're trying to find something that exists out there, when in fact, we are collectively generating what exists out there. If we want to understand what exists and how it exists, it's at the level of this incredibly powerful consciousness. And many times, I'll just add this as a kind of confirmation for me, although I don't understand it, many times when Geshe Drakpa was talking on this subject of how things exist, it would come to my mind, it's like, I cannot believe the power of our consciousness. Our consciousnesses have how we've generated this whole thing that we're discussing. There's no level, there's nothing you can think of or discuss that isn't arising from our consciousness. There's no science, there's no cosmology, there's nothing to be discussed other than what is emanating from our shared consciousness. This power of this is so immense, we're so in it. And I just share that because without that context, we can start to debate at a level that's kind of almost irrelevant. It's, almost like, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic type of discussion. Anyway, so I recommend a little reading on the formation of the cosmos from our tradition, unless you want to just reject it, which is your choice, of course. But I'm trying to understand this from within the lineage that I've decided to take on board, because again, here's another fact. Okay, and this is getting into like the why are we even doing this? Okay, everything is arising through consciousness. Well, I'm choosing to shape my consciousness, joining with the lineage with similarly vibrating sentient beings, because I would like to choose a cosmos that is reflective of non-harming and reflective of truth, beauty, and goodness. And so by choosing a path, what are we actually doing? We're choosing a stream of consciousness that we are affiliating with from now on, so that we move forward through this evolution that is boundless, could be anything. And I'm trying to convey the immenseness of this topic, and then the final point boils down to it is the power of the consciousness. I don't know if any of you have ever read or are aware of Edgar Cayce, who was an active kind of prophet and psychic, and he's identified as the father of holistic medicine, because he was talking about things way before it was known about the interaction of stuff with our health. But anyway, he always used the phrase in his language, mind is the builder. And that is, we want to get out from under rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic. Sorry about the diatribe.
No,
it's so relevant.
That's a good point. Actually, the point about pathways is we hear the word pathway, and we picture some little something going down through the forest. But what they're talking about, Tibetan children always says, these are pathways of consciousness. So it's not the kind of pathway we tend to think of. And what a consciousness is basically a continual awareness. A continual awareness. And what Kabir is saying, what are we choosing to continually have as our awareness. What are we choosing? Are we choosing things that are going to cause us suffering, cause us to behave in bad ways? And it's difficult because these habitual propensities that we have are very strong. We all know how strong habits can be. We all know how difficult it can be to break what we would consider to be a bad habit because it's so strong. Well, this is exactly what we're facing here when we're talking about our mental continuum, you might say, our pathway of consciousness. We have these particular habits and
Remember, I read
ways.
this morning, good habits are as hard to break as bad habits.
Yeah, there's Kavita's doing a particular program, a diet program. It's called Noom, and you've got this whole. She has this whole interactive program with it. It's great. I was thinking, my God, you could use this model to teach Buddhism, because it's the way this particular Noom diet thing is put together is really, really good. Anyway, one of the things that it said, I think it was yesterday, that say it again.
Good habits are as hard to break as bad habits.
Good habits are as hard to break as bad habits. So if we can
That's what's saying. I mean,
But I think it's true, because what we do with any habit is the reason this becomes a habit is because we keep repeating it. The frequency of it becomes almost automatic, almost moment to moment, really. The very, very strong habits, they're always there in the back of our mind. They're always there in the back of our mind. So if you're trying to create habits that are going to bring you about happiness, then what the Buddha pathways of consciousness are offering are those habits, those kinds of habits that will shift the propensity or the shape of the mental continuum, the consciousness, the pathway of consciousness, towards something that is only going to be of benefit, only is going to bring about happiness, only is going to relieve suffering, instead of kind of the mishmash that we have going on, and in many ways it always winds up, being unsatisfactory, the way our habits, the way our sort of uncontrolled innate habits have been developing.
the desire realm.
Yeah, and that is what samsara is. That's what samsara is. That's what cyclic existence is nothing but a bunch of different kinds of habits which create different kinds of realms where these habituated people or beings hang out and play out these habits. We are currently, all of us as humans, are in what are called the desire realm. So we are basically, if you look at what desire is, what is desire? Desire is a state in which you're never satisfied. You are always desiring. It's not called the satisfaction realm. It's called the desire realm. Now that sounds, when I first heard the desire realm, I thought, oh, I'm glad I'm in that. Oh, desire. But when I actually thought about it, all desire is not being satisfied. Perpetually not being satisfied.
You're too hot, you're too cold.
Perpetually wanting something different, wanting something better. When we get the thing we want, it's not actually what we thought we wanted. It's not good enough. Or if any addict knows, the more they take the drug, the more they drink the alcohol, the more whatever it is they do, the less satisfaction they get from it. The more they have to do, the different kind of drug or different kind of whatever, they have to keep varying it, because there is no satisfaction in this kind of grasping that we have, this desire realm. So this is where we are at right now. We have to look at that. And that's what's going on. And how do we shift from this continuum of desire, not being satisfied, to a continuum of this is what I'm doing is the correct thing. This is satisfying. It is beneficial. It's making me happy. It's making others happy. And it's moving, and filled with energy and joy. That's what we're looking for. That's the kind of existence I think all of us are looking for. And the Buddha is
Christopher,
offering that.
yeah, so I just want to say a couple things. And I guess on the one hand, I live in the desire realm to understand Buddha's philosophy and Buddha's teachings, and I'm not satisfied because I don't understand them. So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is, when I first got into this, one of the things that attracted me was, Buddha said, look, this is what I think, this is what I've come to believe, this is what I teach, but don't take my word for it. Use logic, analyze, see if it makes sense to you. And so when I, ask a question, it's usually from the context of, well, I see something that logically doesn't align with what I understand as the Buddhist teachings, philosophy, beliefs. And, so I'm trying to just edify my own understanding, and I'm not doing it to in any way say I think this is not true or anything. I'm just trying to say I see this as an illogical path here where, so that's the reason I ask these questions. The third thing, the last thing I would say is that, Tracy keeps telling me it's always and. It's not one or the other. It's always and. So you can, it seems to me, have this continuum that we are on, and you can describe it however you want. Habituations, propensities, accumulative karma, whatever, that is constantly changing and evolving, which would fit the definition of, either emptiness or lack of independent existence. But at the same time, you could still say, well, the Buddha's offered a path and I need to follow that path. And I'd like to follow the path because I know that that is the right path. And it is logically the right path rather than it's the right path because the Buddha said it's the right path, just like, some priest said this is the right path and I should do it. So that's all.
No, that's perfect, Brian. That's excellent. That's
If
exactly.
anything you've heard here makes you think we're just believing because Buddha said so, then we didn't communicate
Yeah.
well.
It is all of this.
And because I refer to other texts doesn't mean I'm blindly, they stand up to logic. And of course, logic, there's a problem with logic because the basis from which we're doing our logical analysis might have a flaw we're unaware of.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Brian, what you said is absolutely true. And there's actually no point in believing something. Believing something is like what you were saying, that some authority tells us that, say it's the Buddha, and there are those who, just because the Buddha said it, they believe it, but they don't actually, they're not actually doing what the Buddha said to do. He said, do not take my word for this. You need to find this out for yourself. Basically, he's telling us what he found himself, just like you said. And if believing something is not going to do the trick for us, it's not going to make us change. We have to logically understand it. We have to know it for ourselves so that it's not a belief, but it's an actual knowledge and a realization that we ourselves have had, that we have the full understanding of, and we understand the logic and the reasoning and everything behind it. And I think that's why the Buddhist path can get so profound. And some of this, what we're talking about today, it's almost even hard to hear the words that are being said because it goes so against our innate hardwired way of looking at things that we are in the process of trying to look at and undo and see if that is what the problem is. From my point of view, so far, the Buddhist teachings, the reason I follow them is because I see the logic in it. Particularly in these teachings on emptiness, I see the logic in it. I cannot deny the logic. And so that's what keeps me going. I guess there is some faith there. I guess I would say there's faith there because if the Buddha said these particular things, these teachings, and they seem to be so logical and correct to me, then I tend to think, well, let me look at something else he said and not just close my mind to it, but at least be open to it because there's so much I don't know. There's so much I don't already know. And I think it's great to question, Brian. I really do. I think that's exactly what you should be doing. We should all be questioning, I mean, Tony, Tracy, all of us, we should all be questioning, because it's the only way we're going to find answers for ourselves. Yeah. That are meaningful and lasting. So let's see, where are we? These discussions are great. Feel free to jump in anytime you hear anything, because this is not easy stuff to actually hear. Okay. Because of our habituation to ignorance since time without beginning, whatever that means, all the things that appear to our eye, ear, nose, tongue, tactile, and mental consciousnesses. So you have to understand, when Buddha talks, he talks about sense consciousnesses. There's a sense organ. We have an eyeball, we have an ear drum, but there are also sense consciousnesses that go with that. So when we're talking about consciousness in terms of the aggregates, there's an eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, tactile, and mental consciousness. So all of the things that appear to these consciousnesses do not at all seem as if they exist by the power of conventional, agreed upon, conceptual designation. So it doesn't seem, when we're looking around whatever room we're in, that everything in that room exists because of the power of our subjective consciousness and our agreement upon those of like mind, that this is what these are what these objects are. It doesn't appear that way to us at all. It appears as if, you know, the lamp, the TV, the couch, they're all out there independently sitting there from their own side, going, you know, screaming out couchness, lampness, tableness, floorness, you know, and that it's not something that we are merely labeling, conceptually labeling and designating it to be that thing and having an agreement among ourselves that that's what it is. It doesn't appear that way to us. Everything appears as if it exists inherently and independently from the side of the labeled, designated objects that serve as the bases for imputations. In other words, the inherent existence of the object is subjectively conceived by the mind rather than existing that way independently of the mind. So we are conceiving with our minds that these things around us, the people, the tables, the lamps, we are conceiving with our minds that they are existing independently and inherently. The table, the lamp, the chairs, the people are not, well, the people, forget the people. The table, the lamps, the chairs, the floor, they are not conceiving in their mind that they exist independently at all. They are not, for instance, this is not conceiving that it's a book, a little pamphlet on how to be a bodhisattva. It's not conceiving that at all. From its own side, it doesn't exist that way. We are the ones who do this. We are the ones who make this. We are the ones who create the little words and the letters and the thoughts and the things that go in here. We're doing it all. It's like Kavita said, and Tracy was saying, the power of our consciousness is such that we can't even see how powerful it is. It's so powerful, we think we have nothing to do with what's going on around us, that it's all sort of happening out there and it's happening to us, when in fact we are the ones that are making it be what it is. And this is very hard to hear and very hard to wrap our mind around, because it seems to go against every innate feeling that we have. And when basically this is why we talked about innate delusions and intellectual delusions. The innate delusion is the one that is the most difficult. You know, the intellectual ones, I mean, people change their minds about thought systems and religions and science all the time. I mean, that's the nature of science, actually, is that it keeps changing. I mean, it keeps having new theories and trying those theories and testing them and seeing if they work. And, you know, that's the nature of science. I mean, so when you hear some official from the government say, trust the science, well, what the most you can say is, well, trust the fact that trust the system of experimentation, trial, error, change, trust that, but just don't trust something because somebody says to. That's as bad as, that's just an intellectual belief. And we want to stay away from that. We want to stay away from just belief, because belief can really get us into trouble. So objects or entities do undeniably exist. We can't say that they don't exist. So, I mean, this is coming from all of our teachers have said this, Nagarjuna has said this, the Buddha has said this. Objects or entities do undeniably exist. But because they do not exist independently or inherently from their own side, they must exist by the power of subjective convention, our agreement, and conceptual designation. That's how they exist. He says there's no alternative. If they don't exist inherently from their own side, then they have to exist as a subjectively conceived, designated thing. That's how they exist. An entity, whether it's a person or some other type of phenomena, exists because it is being conceptually designated upon something that is not it. So in other words, this something we are designating, they would say this coaster is the basis of designation. The basis of designation, and everything else that you look around is the basis of designation. And this coaster only exists as a coaster because we designate it to be so. The thing that is the basis of what we're designating is not. It's not a coaster. It's not inherently a coaster at all. It could be anything. We could make it a frisbee. We could call it whatever we want. But we agree that this is what this is. This is what it functions as, a coaster that has a function. You put your, cup that's going to, get the top of the table wet on top of this, so it won't get the top of the table wet. And the top of the table and the cup and all of those things are simply conceptually labeled and designated by the subjective consciousnesses that are in agreement about what this thing is and what it functions as. And that's how objects and entities exist. Not from their own side inherently. And that's something to think about. That's just something to think about. Because that's not the way we've been thinking about things forever, So it's a big shift. It's a big shift. And so all we can do is start to think that way, start to think in those terms. So now we go on to the innate self-grasping of persons.
Christopher, can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
If such a thing exists, if to our discussion, if things do exist, but we conventionally agree upon a definition, then how does that impact our part of the purpose of pursuing this path is to be of benefit to others? And so if our mind is not aware of things in their entirety, it's difficult. Is it possible for us to identify how to be of benefit to others?
Well, I mean, the Buddha had us start out pretty slowly and simply. But basically, the way to just start out from where we are, the level that we're at, he basically gave us, these 10 actions of body, speech, and mind. And we should abide by these 10 actions and avoid the opposite of them. So it's basically don't kill, don't steal, don't engage in sexual misconduct, don't lie, don't use harsh and insulting words, all these kinds of things that if we just did those things, we would stop harming others. We would stop harming other beings. And if we did the opposite of them, rather than say just don't kill, don't steal, don't engage in sexual misconduct, for instance, say, may I help and protect and save life. May I protect and save life. Do the opposite of don't kill. Protect and save life. Do the opposite of don't kill. Be generous and unselfishly giving, and not just with material things, with your time, with your attention, with your be generously and unselfishly giving. Don't be harmless in your sexual behavior. Don't hurt anybody through it. You know, it's so rather than just the don'ts, don't do this, don't do that, the Buddha is also saying, do the opposite of them. You know, and then you really are going to be a benefit to others. You're going to help them. And the other thing that's incredibly powerful about this, if we just do these little things, like, for instance, just take the first one, protect and save lives when you can. Protect and save lives when you can. So simply by doing that, simply by doing a little act of not killing the ant that's on, or the ants that are on your counter. So when you have all these tiny ants on your counter, and your first tendency is smash them, spray them, get rid of them, kill them. Well, what you're doing to your mental continuum, the habitual mental formations of your continuum, is you're going, in my mental continuum, I smash, I kill, I destroy. So if you then start going, oh, wait a minute, this not only is this going to benefit the ant, it's going to start to change my whole mental continuum. If I go, all right, I'm just going to wipe around this ant, I'm going to tap the counter so it moves away when I have to clean it. I'm just not going to kill the ants. I'm just not going to do it. What that does to your mental continuum is very powerful, because in your mental continuum, you're creating the habit not to harm, not to kill. And it will only get stronger the more you do it. Now, and we can't, I mean, we kill unintentionally all the time. There's no way we can avoid it. But to intentionally kill, just because we don't like it, it's in our way, is creating the habit in our mind stream to intentionally kill. And that's just one example of all the different, it's same goes for lying and for stealing and for sexual misconduct and, you know, for intending to harm, you know, all these kinds of things, or even holding wrong views. The more we can understand the view of emptiness, the more we can understand the view of impermanence, the view of karma, the clearer our mind stream will be in that regard. So it's only beneficial, like Kevin, what you're saying, what can we do now? We can start there, because that's where the Buddha had us start. That was the very first thing. For anybody at whatever level you are on the path, start there with those. It's even in you can download these. They're called the 10 virtuous actions, I think, on our website. And you can download them. And it can be part of how you live, you know, constantly. You can, you know, in the morning when I go through my meditation, I always go through those, and I go through exactly what they are, so that I familiarize my mind with it, so that I can train my mind to do this, and it trains my mental continuum to go in a direction. And it's only going to make our ability to understand these more profound concepts easier, because we won't be so disturbed in our minds with all the kind of afflictive emotions that we have. So that's my answer to that, Kevin, what we can do, like right now. And ultimately, you know, to help others, to help others understand the pathway, you know, the Bodhisattva pathway to enlightenment, to be of benefit to others, is benefiting, is a help. I think it's helping all of us to do this, you know. I mean, it's certainly it is broadening my mind. It's broadening my awareness of how I should be and the kinds of things I should be doing to be of benefit. And I'm hoping that it is for everyone else. So you know, it's just we just take where we are at, you know, and start there, and be of benefit in the ways that we can be of benefit, and don't harm whenever it's possible. Don't harm. Okay. Okay. Before, what time is it?
12:20.
Okay. Before we're able to realize the selflessness of persons, we first have to understand the innate self-grasping of persons and recognize the nature of this grasping. The innate self-grasping of persons is the mind that conceives the individual to be inherently existent. When someone speaks to us, for instance, we never think, Teresa is speaking to my body, or Kavita is speaking to my mind, or
To my ears.
or I was going to say, Brian is speaking to my ears. That's not the way we do it. We go, Teresa is speaking to me, Kavita is speaking to me, Brian is speaking to me. That's we don't think, we think in terms of me. So we think that this me or the I, it somehow exists inherently unto itself, almost as if it was some kind of owner, the owner or controller of our body and mind. That's how we think of it. We go, my body, my mind, my ears, my whatever, as if there is the I, a me, a self there that is not of the body or the mind, but is kind of like the controller of it. So, such a vividly appearing and recognizable, we all recognize this. We use it in our language. We all recognize this I. Something that's so vividly appearing and recognizable as this I, and unrelated to the body and the mind, is called the conceived object of the innate self-grasping of persons. So when we're talking about the innate self-grasping of persons, this is the object we're talking about. This thing, this me that we think is not part of our mind and body, but it somehow controls it. It says it's my mind, my body, my thoughts, my speech, my everything. That's the innate self-grasping of persons that we're talking about. This is the thing we're refuting. This is the subtle object that is refuted or negated by the view of emptiness. So when we have a view of emptiness, this thing that's going my this, my that, me, is going to be negated. The purpose of all of Shantideva's following lines of reasoning that establishes the selflessness of persons is to uproot this vividly appearing I. So here's how we go about finding the I. Everything that appears to the minds of ordinary people, like we said before, is grasped at as being truly self-existent. In reality, however, true self-existence is utterly non-existent. True self-existence is utterly non-existent. If things truly exist, if something truly exists in the way it appears, then we should be able to find it when we look for it. And if we were to find it, it would have to exist in one of three places. In one of the aggregates of form and consciousness that constitute an individual, or in the collection of all of those aggregates, or somewhere other than those two places. That's where we would find this I. So Shantideva has stanzas 57, 58, 59, and it says you can't find it in the teeth, the hair, the nails. The eye is not in the body's grease or the sweat, the lungs, the liver, not in the inner organs. The eye is not in the flesh, it's not in the skin, it's not in the body's warmth, it's not in the breath, it's not in all these things that are in the body. It's not in all six consciousnesses. You're not going to find the I in the I, the me, in the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, sense consciousness, tactile sense consciousness, and the mental consciousness. The I, you're not going to find that I, because that I is always going to say, well, that's my eye consciousness, that's my mental sense consciousness. You're not going to find, all right, where are you, me? Where are you, if you're owning all of this stuff? So we're not going to find it there. So individually, each of those parts can't be the I, because in that case, if the I was each of those parts, it would follow that the person would have as many I's as there are parts. The brain can't be the I, because from our own experience, like I said, we'll say, this is my brain. So we know, well, if this thing is saying it's my brain, then that's not the I. The I is not the brain, because the I is telling me it's mine. It belongs to me. Many of us think that the collection of all the parts together is the I, but since we've already shown that there's no I to be found among any of the parts that form this collection, how can the collection itself then be the I? It's also clear that the I can't be found anywhere other than among the 5 aggregates of form, sensory feeling, discrimination, habitual mental formations, and conscious awareness that comprise the entire experience of our existence. There's no other place we're going to find the I. Now, if somebody were to say out of a belief, well, the I is, oh, it's my soul, and my soul is in heaven. Well, where is the empirical truth of that? You know, I mean, how do you prove that? That is just, again, what we're saying is that's a intellectual delusion. Because if it can't be found, if you cannot prove that, if there's no explanation for it, then how can you say that's what it is? And, you know, beliefs can be very, very, very strong. And people can be, and I never want to step on anybody's beliefs, but just from my own perspective, that's where I go. You know, when somebody said, well, no, the I is the soul. I'll say, well, show me that soul, you know. Basically, you're not going to find it. It's a construct. So since it exists merely as an imputation that depends on the collection of mental and physical aggregates, the I as such has no real existence of its own. And yet, when it appears to our mind, it does not seem to be a mere conceptual designation upon the aggregates. Instead, it appears to exist objectively. What time is it now?
I'm sorry, this is still stuff about their car.
Okay, 12:27. All right.
Okay.
I want to get into this, and is Vicky and Ajay not coming?
Correct.
Okay, so we can go over this a little time. This is basically this is the last thing. So we've talked about this thing before, the rope and the snake. Remember, we've talked about the rope and the snake in the dark.
Yep.
So, and the situation that we find ourselves in with this I is comparable to this. It's comparable to what might happen to us in the gathering twilight when we can't see very clearly. And we see a striped rope and think that it is a snake. And that conviction that it's a snake will remain unshakable in us until something about the condition changes, until, you know, there's some light that we can actually see. So just imagine that you're in this dark, it's kind of dark, but you can see what looks to you like a striped snake, and the effect that this has on you, because it's just, you know, feet away from you. So at that time, there is no perception of a striped rope at all. In a similar way to which we grasp this rope as a snake, we grasp the person as being inherently existent. We think we're seeing something there that isn't actually there. The striped rope and our aggregates are similar in that they act as the bases for such misconceptions. If we were to reach out in the gloom and try to locate the snake, even if our hand didn't encounter anything at all, it would still be difficult for us to shake off the feeling that the snake is there, and we would be filled with fear. I mean, have you ever had anything like this happen to you? I have. I think when I was little, I have, where I thought there was something there that wasn't there, and I was petrified, just petrified. In a similar way, if in our ignorance we grasp at an inherently existing I, we subject ourselves to the fears of cyclic existence. Remember, it's the grasping, the ego self-grasping, which is the basis for cyclic existence. Now, if a bright lamp were to shine light on the darkness in which we found ourselves, illuminating the whole place, no snake would be seen, but only a rope, and we would realize our mistake.
That's you.
That's me. Oh, oh yeah, okay. We would realize that a snake never actually was there, and we would immediately be released from the grip of fear. It would be like that. It's like, oh, I was mistaken. It never existed the way I thought it did. Likewise, by realizing the non-existence of an inherently existing I, we cease to grasp at it as well and are liberated from the fears and suffering of cyclic existence. The mistaken mind does not perceive a striped rope, but only a snake, which has been imputed onto the rope. Likewise, our innate self-grasping of persons does not apprehend our aggregates of body and mind, but only an inherently existing, vividly appearing I. Both of these false conceptions in turn give rise to fear. So this grasping at a me is what gives rise to our fears. In order to uproot these misconceptions, it's necessary first to recognize the respective conceived object, the snake and the inherently existing I. We have to recognize what those are and then realize that they are completely non-existent. Once we understand that the inherently existing I is non-existent, then by continually meditating and becoming familiar with its non-existence, all the grasping at an inherently existing I can be completely uprooted. Since this grasping is the root of all suffering in cyclic existence, through abandoning it, we also come to abandon all suffering. Okay, so I'll leave it there because that's pretty much the end. But what this is pointing to is that this realization of the emptiness of an inherently existing self is going to remove all of our suffering. It's going to remove all of our fear. It's going to pull us out of this cycle of suffering and fear, which we call cyclic existence. This cycle of, at least in this realm, constant dissatisfaction, not getting what we want, and ultimately, having to suffer. If we can see the inherently existing I, the me that we think is in here, and we could see it that it's, oh, wow, it's actually just nothing more than similar to just like the striped rope. We're mistaking this for being something that it actually isn't.
Shantideva went to all this trouble because he looked at his fellow beings and had such pity on them that he attempted to convey this information because he could see that it was causing suffering.
And this is what the Buddha is saying. I mean, when the Buddha was saying in his First Noble Truth, there is suffering, that was the first thing he's talking about. There's suffering. This is the whole point. This is the whole point of the Buddhist pathway of consciousness that leads to enlightenment, is to remove our suffering, to remove our fear, and to help others do the same. That's what it's about. That's why we want to strive to have a realization of emptiness. And they say the first thing we need to do is have a realization of this emptiness of the self, of the I, the selflessness of the person. Okay, so we'll stop there. And
It does seem abstract and intellectual.
there's no way around it. There's no way around it, but we have to.
And as Kevin pointed out, one wonders, well, how do I apply this?
And like I said, we go back to the initial teachings the Buddha gave for that just from whatever, wherever you're at, you can do these things. You can benefit sentient beings in this way, by doing these 10 virtuous actions and avoiding these 10 non-virtuous actions of body, speech, and mind. That's the place to start. And by doing that, that's going to clear up a lot of the disturbance in our own mind so that we'll be able to focus on these kinds of teachings more clearly and be able to meditate on them more clearly. It all goes hand in hand. They all help one another. All right. Let's do the dedication prayers. Our usual ones, dedication of merit down the bottom of the second page. And we'll go ahead and do these in the Tibetan today. 장축섬 초그림포체 마키파남 예규치 계파냠파 메파양공내공루 펠와르수 동예타와 림포체 마키파남 예규르치 계파냠파 메파양공내공루 펠와르수. And then at the bottom of the last page, the final dedication, and we'll do this one in English. In all my lives, may I not be separated from true lamas, and so enjoy the splendor of Dharma, fully perfecting the virtues of levels and paths. May I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara. And when they're talking about those levels and paths, they're talking about levels of consciousness and paths of consciousness, pathways of consciousness. That's what it's all about. It's all about consciousness. Okay.
Thank you.
Any parting words?
Thank you, Christopher.
Thank
Great
you.
class, great discussion.
Thank you.
So
And like
good.
you said, go Spurs.
Go Spurs. Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Have a great rest of your
Okay,
day.
you heard there's no Tibetan.
Yeah, no Tibetan class.
Yeah, we've heard no Tibetan language class. Got it. Thanks.
Okay, see y'all.
Bye.
Bye.